All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully my voice will hold out. We just had our annual summit in Las Vegas for Atlassian last week, and it's a little worn out, but I still wanted to be able to present this to you all today. Again, my name is Goh-Davis. I'm a solutions engineer with Atlassian, and before I get into quite a bit of content we've got to cover today, I just want to give you a little bit about myself by way of background. So I'm currently based in Sydney. I'm originally from the US. I've worked for a number of software companies in Australia, in Europe, in the US. I have over 30 years of experience in information technology, first 10 years in development, the last 20 years in pre-sales. And I've managed a number of different teams along the way. Some good, some great. I think we've each worked for both of those. And of course, as part of a lot of the chat that we'll be having today, I'm also a certified Scrum Master. I wanted to cover a few main portions of ITSM. So we'll talk first and foremost kind of some of my own experiences around the software development lifecycle and what I call the SDLC supernova. So I'll give you a bit more on what that means. We'll look at how it's necessary to not only look at different products as part of taking on board service management, but what that means in the way of redefining different roles and responsibilities. And then we'll take a specific example within ITSM around incident management and look at how you can pair ITSM and Agile capabilities and how you can really address fine-tuning your mean time to resolution as part of that. And then I'll leave you all with a follow-up ITSM white paper that you can read as well. So again, I started off my career as a software developer. And when I was working as a junior programmer for a financial services company, who shall remain nameless, because when I finished a batch of changes my first month on the job and went to my manager, I said, right, where do we put these in for finalized testing? And he literally said, oh, just put it in production, that's the final QA. Now, you would think that things like that would only happen 30 years ago, but I hear of this still happening today. So this is not a product issue, this is not a methodology issue, this is a cultural, behavioral issue. And I think there are a lot of things like that that we need to challenge in order to really improve things around that, especially when you look at all the things that software teams have to deal with today, from, all right, no longer just putting changes in production on your own, but putting some code control around that, looking at being able to tie some analysis and linking change to reason. And all of this already, whether you were waterfall or agile, these were all technologies and methodologies that you had to take on board. But if you did decide to move more toward the agile end of the spectrum, you then had to deal with those aspects and how that changed your code management, whether it's just for software development or how you actually push those changes into production, moving from Agile to Devops, and improving not just the velocity of changes, but the quality as well. So how do you do that, whether it's just DevOps? And DevOps alone isn't enough anymore. I was at an event in Singapore a few weeks ago, and it's DevSecOps or BizDevSecOps, or take your mix. But the point being, there's more and more that we're packing in for software teams to have to deal with. And we take that and package it up, and we say, take this all on board, do it faster, and do it better. And eventually it blows up in our faces. And the issue isn't the products. The issue isn't the methodology. The issue fundamentally is usually just bad habits and roles that we need to rethink. The way I think that's come to be is the fact that when you had a waterfall design, when you were building for a long period of time and then released, you had the luxury of being able to define roles in a very specific way. And if you didn't see the cracks in those roles appear in waterfall, you might start to notice some inconsistencies when you shift to more of an agile design. When it's more of a build release, you've now moved from perhaps a project that ran for a year to a build that would last for a month. But if you haven't seen the cracks moving to agile, you'll definitely see it by the point in time you move to DevOps, because the number of iterations that you're pumping out again leads to showing these inefficiencies quite quickly. So why is that? What is the difference? And when you look at moving beyond just what developers are dealing with to tying in the operations side, it becomes even more complex, because developers are incented to make more changes, and change is good, and change velocity is a good thing. IT and operations, change is something that keeps them up at night, right? It's something they want to control, something they want to mitigate. So there's an inherent wall between these two worlds. This gets even worse when you start looking at taking on board a full-blown ITSM type solution, because you'll get these perspectives from people on some version of either we're not doing ITSM, we're strictly DevOps. They kind of seem to think that it's two separate things. It's an either-or proposition, that, we're DevOps, therefore we can't do ITSM, or the reverse, we're far too process-oriented that we couldn't possibly do DevOps. And actually, there are ways to blend these two together, especially with ITIL 4. There are a number of ways to actually bind together Agile and ITSM. Starting to look at how to really address this is what Atlassian's been able to see from a unique perspective. So our stock ticker is team. We are maniacally focused on how teams operate. Most of you, if you haven't heard of any Atlassian products, you've probably heard at least of Jira or Confluence. It's all around facilitating teamwork. And so as part of that, we have tremendous insight into our own company or our hundreds of thousands of customers on kind of the science of how teams operate. And I want to go through first off what some of those results are and how they can improve some of the barriers like I've already described. Then we've got our own spin-on practices out of that as well. Again, blending Agile and ITSM and other ancillary aspects of moving into ITSM. And then finally, yes, looking at the products that need to underlie all of this to tie all these aspects together. But before we even move into products, and this is coming from somebody who works for a software company, right? Let's forget about the products for a moment. Let's talk about what it means for these teams to actually work together. Because we noticed, like I've seen in my history, like you have probably seen on your own, working at different companies on different teams, that they don't always tend to gain the same successes. Now, why is that? It almost seems like a mystery sometimes, right? We went through and reflected internally. And it's interesting that each of us go through an annualized performance review, right? Mine's coming up in a couple of months, and your manager will have a chat to you, and you know what that process looks like. But who looks at the health of the team? Who understands if the team is operating efficiently that you're on? Well, that's something that we've finally bound together as a set of deliverables that are available for all of you to use. And at this URL, and I'll mention it a couple of times in the presentation, are a set of documents that I'm about to go through that have absolutely no ties to any of our products. So this is literally kind of the science and our own analysis and our own experience and working with our larger customers of what we found as helping to get teams more successful. And so we call them our team playbooks. And it takes this idea of a periodic check for an individual and moves it up to a team level. And we really have two main components to that. How do we measure? How do we monitor? How do we figure out where our baseline is? And we give you some different ways and techniques on how to establish that. And then once you've figured that out, how do you improve? What are some methods or some processes that we've seen help to move that metric up one notch or more? That's what these team playbooks are essentially about. Now, we tend to think mostly in software development terms for this activity, but actually we've worked with so many different companies that you'll find these for leadership teams, finance, HR, service, a number of different types of teams. This is meant to be pretty generic, and so teaming in its truest sense is part of that. And it starts with some type of assessment. Now, I started with Atlassian about 2 years ago, and I went to our first team offsite after I was on board 3 months, and we sat in a room and we did this health assessment, and my manager was there, and we literally did, so you can do color-coded, you can do more of an anonymous type of a voting thing, or we just did thumbs up, thumbs down, thumb to the side in the room. And there were a couple of measurements where you're sat there with your manager and basically saying, I think this aspect of the team kind of sucks, is basically what you're communicating. But the funny thing was, there were a couple of us that identified areas that really needed improvement. And it's interesting when you're able to agree to that as a team, when you can really isolate the areas that need improvement and have an honest conversation with your team members and with your manager, that it really starts getting that it really starts getting that conversation underway in terms of how you can fix that. And it makes it incontrovertible, right? You end up with a deliverable like this. We use color-coded Post-it notes on a window in the offsite that we were at. And there were actually a couple of line items that were straight red across the board. So it wasn't even a question in anybody's mind, like start here, right? These are the areas that have big, big, big problems. Now, I fully realize, because I've presented these around Asia, and I fully realize that different countries, different cultures, different companies, this is not always going to work the same way. I get that. There are different ways to help ease that in, and I would just have you know that no matter how you do it, it's going to feel a bit unnatural the first time around. But it is helpful if you can at least start having that conversation, because once you get those measurements out there, then you can look at the playbooks on, oh, if this is an area you're weak in, here are some suggestions that we want you to run through to help improve those as well. So one part measuring, one part running through a different number of plays. And if you do nothing else, start here, right? Before you even start looking at products, before you worry about going agile, before you worry about ITIL 4 and being very buzzword compliant, start looking at your teams. This was a result of a lot of things that we saw internally, of our own curiosity, and it's something that we continue to evolve and put effort in and put additional documents around. So this has got a lot of science and evaluation behind it. So start there. Then, in terms of different practices, I mentioned earlier a bit of friction between Agile and ITSM. A lot of people tend to think it's one or the other, but I think we can take benefits of both as well, especially with the latest version of ITIL. You don't necessarily need to be so process burdened, as is shown on the left, that it's just constricting, right? You can overdo process and have process get in the way. I think as we move a little bit more on the right-hand side of the screen here, we can look at things at, again, decentralizing control a bit, letting teams take on a bit more, flattening out the hierarchy in a support structure. Classically, it has a bit more of a level 1, level 2, level 3. You'll hear talk of level Z or shifting left or anything to help flatten that out and allow teams to operate a bit more quickly on the operations side, just as they do on the development side. And there are different ways of being able to blend those two together as well, so that, again, the teams can focus on creating the right support environment and adding value for their customers, to then use the right products to provide the necessary interfaces, and essentially building this entire end-to-end process of more collaboration and trust. And it doesn't happen on day one. It doesn't happen on day one, and you don't get it right every time. We've had a couple of missteps of our own where we'll publish the experience that we've had and the process that we went through and what we learned from it and what we did to rectify it as well. So now the products start to come in, right? If you're looking at ITSM, there are a number of different processes that you can look at, usually around change management, service request management. The big one that we'll talk to here is incident management, just because it tends to be the most intensive one to deal with. But this is where you'll start looking at Service Desk, Confluence, perhaps Ops Genie to integrate things, and Status Page, mostly what we'll work through today. But a number of different processes. Incident management is the biggest one, primarily because it's the one that ends up in the news, honestly, right? Stuff goes down, there's a big enough outage, this ends up on somebody's screen somewhere. And it's something that can very easily bring things to a standstill, right? So, in terms of not necessarily what the incident itself looks like, but how we measure areas to improve, Forrester came up with quite a while ago this idea of an MTTR, or mean time to resolution. And it measures end-to-end everything that's shown on the slide here. There is one area, though, where we tend to spend 3/4 of our time. Anyone want to guess which colored column it is? You think it's red, yellow, blue, or green? I heard one answer. Green. Orange. I guess it does look orange. On my slide it looks red, but orange is the color up there. Okay, orange is a close second. It's actually the yellow one. We tend to spend most of our time, the bulk of what contributes to a mean time to resolution, is respond and investigate, oddly enough. So if you want to think of where to focus your energy on what component to reduce, let's zero in there to try to bring down the overall number. The orange one, I would agree with you, is a close second. And as I go through the next few slides, you'll see why, but for a slightly different reason. And in fact, we're about to get there really quickly. Usually when we set up these different types of response systems end to end, we focus a lot on the left side, and we have heaps of alerts coming out of these systems, right? So we try to make it HA, we scale the system up, we put in a number of monitoring systems, we've got all these messages coming across, and maybe we put a service desk of some sort on the right-hand side, and then the IT team just gets bombarded, right? It's never a problem, it's never an issue that messages don't come across. It's either there's too many of them, and they can't figure out which one to prioritize, or things are getting routed to the wrong place. That's why this respond and investigate segment is so important. We need to figure out ways to automate that and to filter out the noise, to reduce that noise to signal ratio. And this is exactly where some of the products in our suite start to fit in. And in fact, some of you may have heard, we acquired OpsGenie not too long ago. This is exactly why we did that, because we realized that we need some way to just lend additional logic, make these messages more readable, route them to the right person at the right time in the right way to make sure that we can tackle that MTTR. And then, yeah, link it up to a service desk as well, but also make sure that OpsGenie can act as kind of the central hub for responsiveness so that not only the teams can stay focused on what they need to do and deal with less noise to signal coming in at them, but also give customers a way to find out what's going on without opening more tickets that then IT has to respond to. So this is where all the different products in our suite start to fit in, or at least the main ones. There are some supportive ones, certainly as well. Now, of course, given the event that we're at, OpsGenie has a number of different integrations. Many of those tie directly into AWS. So whether it's SES or SNS or CloudWatch is kind of the big one that I'll call out here. We have predefined connectors that you can configure and make OpsGenie aware of to take on board those messages and action straight away. You can do that through a number of screens. OpsGenie is a cloud-based SaaS tool. And rather than having to deal with cloud-based messages whenever there's an incident that might come out of CloudWatch that probably looks something like this, which, if you read through it long enough, you'll figure out what it means. Wouldn't it be nicer if you just had something like this? All right? Instead of decrypting, just saying, hey, the production queue has more than a certain threshold of messages, and then route that message appropriately for responsiveness. This is one aspect of what OpsGenie provides. And those capabilities combined with the connectors, with lending more intelligence to messages, with intelligent routing is what allows you to take an environment that I showed before and easily splice in monitoring using CloudWatch in different EC2 environments as well. And it ties in quite nicely into our overall design. So with that, I want to put up a short video. It is a bit commercial-ish, but I think it goes through reinforcing the key capabilities of OpsGenie, and then I'll come back and finish off the rest of the presentation as well. So bear with me through this bit for just a couple minutes.
Today's IT and development environments have grown in complexity. They consist of a massive collection of hardware, software, custom applications, and services. When always-on services are required, numerous tools are deployed to ensure performance, reliability, and security. But these systems usually produce an overwhelming number of email notifications. As such, events that require action are often missed, directed to the wrong people, or simply ignored. Mean time to respond, and ultimately uptime, suffer. Enter OpsGenie, a modern incident management platform. OpsGenie ensures critical incidents are never missed, actions are taken by the right people, all in the shortest time. OpsGenie receives alerts from your monitoring systems and custom applications and categorizes each alert based on importance and timing. OpsGenie uses on-call schedules to notify the right people through multiple communications channels, including voice calls, email, SMS, and push messages on mobile devices. If an alert is not acknowledged, OpsGenie automatically escalates it, ensuring the incident gets the needed attention. To speed resolution, Opsgenie can reformat and enrich the monitoring data into more meaningful information. Files and links to reference documentation can be added automatically. Common commands, such as pinging a server or restarting a process, can be added to the alert to gather even more information, or even resolve the problem. Opsgenie can even set up conference bridges and status pages automatically to make sure everyone is informed of the issue. Opsgenie has deep integration into the leading chat and ticketing applications. When notes are added or actions are taken in any system, Opsgenie synchronizes the information in all systems, keeping everyone up to date. Finally, Opsgenie tracks everything. It is easy to report and analyze each incident and resolution, identifying successes and areas that require improvement. Getting started with Opsgenie couldn't be easier. At opsgenie.com, learn about our rich integration with over 200 dev and ops tools, and sign up instantly for a free trial. Notify the right people, reduce response time, avoid alert fatigue with Opsgenie.
Okay, so now you get the idea. It really does act as that central hub within ITSM of mitigating MTTR. And whereas Status Page and Opsgenie both are cloud offerings or SaaS offerings, our Service Desk and Confluence products, and Jira, and a couple of others, tend to be installed on-prem for a lot of our customers. And when you blend these into a full ITSM solution, the reason I call that out here is because for many of those products, for all the data center products, we also provide quick start templates. So CloudFormation templates that allow you to spin up a multi-clustered, a highly available environment for Jira, for Confluence, for Bitbucket, for a number of others. And this is something that we've had out there for quite a while, actually. That is fantastic because we leverage all the key AWS services that you guys probably do for some of your own apps today, right? So if you want an auto-scaled node across different availability zones within one region, we allow you to do that, take advantage of EFS that spans across that to set up databases across those areas as well for as highly available environment as you're going to get within a single region. We leverage all the right services, and we worked with AWS to make that available as well. So we've come up with this. We use much of these templates internally because our own SaaS offerings also run on AWS. And that's fine when you're within one region, but we quite often will get comments from customers who are globally distributed that we've got teams in other areas. What can we do to improve the responsiveness there as well? Because the further you get away from that point, of course, and especially for me as I'm traveling, right, it's going to become pretty apparent when you're limited by the connectivity. This is exactly why we just announced at our summit last week that very soon, I don't have an exact date for you yet, but very, very soon, we will be providing full CDN support with our data center deployment option so that you can use any type of CDN you want. We'll plug directly into that and proactively sync into a local point of presence. And then when someone is looking for a particular site in region, most of that data will come locally, and just the information that isn't cached or is more dynamic will come from that central point. And we'll do that across as many points of presence as you need. And oh, by the way, we will have a predefined, pre-configured connector for CloudFront, not surprisingly as well. So everything that they provide in terms of a number of different points of presence, I think it was like 120 something around the globe. It's all dotted up here on this map, but we'll allow you to plug directly into that as well. So you can make sure that your own environment for dealing with ITSM is as scalable, as available as possible. Again, when we go through this internally, Atlassian is very open about our own experiences and the trials and issues and challenges that we went through. We publish a number of pieces of information, whether it's formalized like the team playbooks or a bit more informal like this one. Our biggest sites that we have out there run on AWS. Our own primary support site, so getsupport.atlassian.com, and our feature request site, jira.atlassian.com, all run within EC2 instances in a number of different regions globally. And as you can see here, we have millions of tickets and users that hit these things all the time. They use those templates that I put out there earlier. We've structured a lot out of this and had a lot of learning experiences on how to really improve this, and that's the blog link that's listed at the bottom as well. So we are big AWS fans internally as well. And as a result of that specific back to ITSM though, again, one part people, one part process, one part just best practices, doing things like not only defining runbooks, playbooks, but in particular a major incident playbook. This is something that we've had to refine and itemize for ourselves and something we would strongly recommend for anyone. And it has steps that look obvious when you read it, but not everyone does it. So number one, clearly define what a major incident is. This is kind of like defining what done is in Agile, right? It sounds simple, but it's not, because you get 20 people in the room and they might have different ideas on what that is. So define what a major incident is, list all your processes, conduct PIRs, conduct post-incident reviews for each of these, publish and share your learnings as well. Put all the information out there and run drills. Number 7 is probably the one that gets missed the most, right? You set everything up and then the first time there's an issue, stuff falls over because it was never really tested thoroughly. So we've packaged together playbooks, ITSM playbooks out of this that you can also load up as templates if you're using our Confluence product. And it allows you to, again, address mitigating that, investigate and respond. Anything to help bring down the overall mean time to resolution. Playbooks are one way to start bringing that down quite dramatically. Same for post-incident reviews, for PIRs. We also allow a number of different templates and options around that, because not unlike what we talked about earlier in the way of metrics, post-incident reviews quite often are forgotten. If they're done at all, they're usually just filed away and nobody ever looks at them again. But there's actually a lot that you can learn out of these things when you pick apart all that information that we saw that OpsGenie is going to capture. Wouldn't it make sense to go through and sift through the actual timeline and the issues and any bugs that were identified and have that all in one place so that you can help prevent future issues? And this is exactly what PIRs help to formalize. So actually going through a PIR process, again, using a Confluence template for this, and just a quick scrolling video for those of you who may not be as familiar with our Confluence product. We can go in, we can put this all in one location, we can comment in line, we can tag people where we need to. We can do a lot with this information just by putting it out there in one consistent, consolidated way. So PIRs are another area where this type of activity helps. And it's, again, this is a result of our own experiences. So the biggest elements out of here, besides just doing PIRs, really come back to some of the teaming aspects. So number 2, usually people are afraid to do a post-mortem or PIR because it can almost feel like a witch hunt, like you're just looking for who made the mistake. You've got to start turning that around, and you need to look at the health of your teams first before you can do this, but you need to start turning that around and look less at who to blame and more at what has to be fixed to prevent it from recurring. So subtle things like number 2 is one element, 5 as well in terms of creating preventative actions. And number 7 also, to publish your PIRs, not only just to share the information, but maybe some of what you found through a post-incident review might change a development practice that's occurring at the source. And so wouldn't it make sense to feed that back to the software team as well? And again, in that blog that I shared earlier, there's a lot more detail around that we have experienced internally. And it gives you insight into the fact that it took us a few goes to get it right as well. But regardless, the tips all along the way are around tackling that mean time to resolution, whether it's the new practices, whether it's the new techniques, the best practices, or products like OpsGenie. Anything you can do to shorten that mean time to resolution, to get people engaged at the right point as quickly as possible, to then communicate out in the right way, both to the IT ops teams and to the customers, so we can keep everyone focused on what's going on, and to just continuously improve things along the way as well. And always think of it kind of the reverse of what we tend to think of building this out, especially on the software. Rather than picking the products, then skilling up on the practices, then, if at all, looking at teams, we actually recommend looking at the pyramid from the other direction, right? Start by looking at your teams, figure out which practices you need to ramp up on, and then use the products that make the most sense. And I wouldn't make this so rigid that you do 1 before 2 before 3, left to right, but I would at least start with 1. Look at your teams first, then move left, maybe in parallel, as it makes sense. So, finally, and this is probably the geekiest pseudocode marketing slide I've ever seen in my life. Finally, don't ever think that this is a one-time event, right? Now, we do our own team analyses twice a year. So we're doing those metrics, we're doing those playbooks every 6 months. So every time don't be afraid to go in, make a change, remeasure it, assess how you went, and I almost guarantee you that while is never going to evaluate the true, right? We're going to be in this loop forever. You're just going to be coming back to this tweaking, coming back tweaking. Don't be afraid to get a little bold where it makes sense. You will make mistakes, but you'll learn from those mistakes too. So just keep going through. And again, where we find when we have a big epiphany out of something or we have substantial findings based on our own internal iterations, we'll publish it out. There is very little that we don't share, other than maybe financial information as a publicly traded company, but we actually share a lot. And most of that centers around how teams work. So a lot of this information we'll continue to put out there over and over again. So that's our thoughts and approach around ITSM and blending in Agile and how some of the products fit in as part of that. More importantly, I want to make sure that you took away the priority, the ordering of that as well. So just to start to wrap things up as we go into the last few minutes of the session, first and foremost, find your baseline with team playbooks, right? Start there. And again, I know it can be hard to get started initially. I know it's going to feel awkward. I know you're going to have challenges along the way. If you're really, really stuck, come chat with one of us. We've had to deal with this with a number of different customers, so we can give you some additional tips and techniques. Number 2, don't be afraid. In fact, I think it's our responsibility to question traditional roles and responsibilities within the company, because many of those were defined when waterfall was still the prevailing methodology, right? This idea of having QA as a separate role, of dealing with security as an afterthought to when products were deployed, which all ties into ITSM, that's waterfall thinking. That's when you had a year to be able to do things. And I'm not saying that QA as its own role doesn't add value, but I think developers could really take on board a lot more of QA techniques to make that part of the development cycle easier, right? What you build should run in production, you should own it, that idea. Same with security. You're seeing a lot more go into that circle and blend over time. So don't be afraid to challenge how you think those roles might need to reshape. We actually, I didn't put it in this slide deck, but we specifically with QA put an article out there that talked about how we shifted quality assurance to quality assistance for our software developers team, because we didn't want developers to look at it as someone else's job. And it sounds subtle, it sounds like wordplay, but it's this idea of taking on board more earlier. So question roles and responsibilities, and then just automate wherever you can, right? And automate throughout the entire spectrum. I think a large part of the issue where we're at today with ITSM is that we've automated on the ends and not in between. Right, so we've got heaps of messages coming in from systems, and we've got ticketing systems that can generate and manage queues at a tremendous scale. But how do you make sure that you don't just take on board the volume, but that you make sure the right information gets routed to the right team at the right time? That's a bit trickier, and that's where OpsGenie in particular fits in. And then experiment and adjust. Do it over and over and over again. So, above and beyond all of this, there are a number of secondary topics we could extend into. And we've just released a couple of weeks ago a new white paper that you can take a look at, specifically for this idea of Agile and ITSM or Lean ITSM. There's a full white paper for you all to be able to download as well and dig into this a bit more. If you have any immediate needs or questions, we have a couple of different booths in the expo, as well as a lounge off by the enterprise track, so you can come find anyone with an Atlassian logo and have a chat with them as well. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'll be around. Again, you can find us at a couple of different locations as well, but appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.